Let me read to you a passage from the 22nd chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel, verses 34 to 40. It's the Gospel for Friday of the 20th week in Ordinary Time. St. Matthew writes, "Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question, 'Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?' Jesus replied, 'Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbour as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments.'" That's from Matthew chapter 22, verses 34 to 40. It reminds us of the call to goodness. What do I mean? Well, a fundamental feature of the human being is that he instinctively knows the objective world, including his own self, precisely as objective realities, entities. Animals are instinctively aware of things to a greater or lesser extent, but they are not aware of things precisely as entities with their own objective existence. I mention this to introduce something the human mind is instinctively aware of, which is especially fascinating. Included in man's instinctive awareness of objective reality is his awareness of the good. Man naturally wants to be good, and he naturally, by very nature, knows that he should be good. This is an act of knowing, an act of his mind, by which man grasps something objective. While it involves a deep feeling, in the first instance, it is something he knows. He knows both that he should be good and that he wants to be good, an obligation and a desire commanding his natural approval. He breaks down as a man if this approval of goodness and of his obligation to be good is corrupted and reversed. Further, this basic desire to be good, which is perceived as an absolute obligation, is universal. Everyone wants to be good, and everyone knows that he is required to be good. It is the basic law of mankind, the universal aspiration of his nature. It is the law which his nature imposes on him, while leaving his freedom untouched. It is an absolute law admitting of no exceptions, whatever be the circumstances. As already said, man is aware of this, and he instinctively and upon reflection judges it to be objective. The natural law binding man to strive to be good by doing what is good, and to avoid being evil by not doing what is evil, is the basis of the sanction behind all those more specific laws of morality and a properly run society. Yet all the while, man knows that he can flout this natural law, should he freely so choose. This natural law requiring the choice of the good is the basis and the informing principle of all the particular judgments of his conscience. It is the fundamental element of man's conscience, what the medieval thinkers called synderesis, after the Greek for conscience, as distinguished from conscientia, or the practical conscience, deciding what should be done here and now. There is a grand and fundamental fact which is naturally perceived by the human mind. It is that man knows he wants to be good, and he knows he is obligated to seek to be good. This is an objective law his very nature presents before him, not as something subject to his own decision, but as something which imposes itself on him. He is subject to it, as to the word of a supreme lawgiver before whom he has the duty to render obedience. This is a fundamental fact about reality from which man must start in his life and in his thought. But granted this, what next? The obvious question is, how is this law which man naturally and instinctively perceives to be objective and binding on him, and which he knows he yearns to fulfill, and in which his truest happiness lies, to be fulfilled? How is it to be fulfilled? What is he to do? How can he fulfill this law to his best limit? That is to say, what does it involve, and how is he to gain the strength to do it? To a point, both these questions are answered by applying the best of his gifts of mind and will to the work. He must develop and refine his practical conscience. But he is a broken, wounded creature, and there are limits to his power to perceive all this, and limits to his moral strength. To this great quandary there comes the announcement from on high, from heaven, that a Redeemer has arrived to show the way and to provide the strength. He is the way, the truth, and the life. All of this brings us to our gospel passage that I read earlier. Which is the greatest of the commandments? Our Lord is asked. What is the first and most important thing incumbent upon us in the matter of our obligation to be good? Our Lord gives us the answer by invoking the words of the inspired writings. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbour as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Matthew chapter 22, verse 34 to 40. If we aspire to be good as we are absolutely commanded to, then we must strive to love God above all else. We must love him with our whole being. Therein lies human goodness. Secondly, we must love our neighbour as ourselves. This summarizes the law and the prophets on God's will for man, and it specifies the end goal for man's natural aspiration and obligation to seek to be good and to avoid evil. How do we love God? As our Lord said to his disciples, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." All of this becomes possible by means of union with Jesus Christ through grace. Man's aspiration to be good and his obligation to be good is fulfilled in and by union in love with the person of Jesus Christ, made possible by faith and by grace. Let us set out then, for therein lies our happiness.